Hey everyone, welcome in. Betsperts Golf here for our first look. Oakmont 2025 U.S. Open. I don't know about Ron. I have actually a pretty good feeling without having spoken to him in detail about this, but personally, I have consumed over the last maybe 2-3 weeks literally everything that's been out there in the Oakmont space. YouTube golfers, people playing on media day. Watch back 2007 highlights, watch back full, Sunday of DJ in 2016, taking in all that I can. The Fried Egg, shout out to the Fried Egg, who's done, tremendous job with, different videos around what's happened in the restoration with, Gil Hance since the last time we were here. Anything that's been out there on the internet, worth its weight. I feel like I have consumed at some point in the last 3 weeks. Even in the road, I was on the road this weekend. Podcasts, anything that I could take in to consume Oakmont and U.S. Open content. I've been in. I am fired up for this. It is you probably have got a sense of some of this already in terms of, what the history is here and what the demand is relative to other U.S. Opens, which again, just on the calendar, I know Ron will get into some of these details. It is typically designed to be the most difficult test, and Oakmont is kind of one of its own, almost in its own category. Ron, what's going on?
Completely agree with you. The Bryson video was amazing. Just the fact that he videoed the full round and you got to see like every shot that he could potentially hit. And I think that's just great insight. And, props to him for the content. And, but no, I think 2016 when I was here, I wasn't really following golf like I am now. And so, I didn't really, obviously back then I wasn't really paying attention to every detail about the course and how it played. And so the years pass and, you go back and I started doing all this research, building a rabbit hole, and you start, reading about Oakmont and how difficult it is. And you look at the data and it's just staggering. I mean, we're talking when you include 2007, which was the other one played, before 2016, I mean, we're talking almost 5 shots over par per round on average. And so, I think there is something for there being one of these majors just being so tough and so unfair. And I'm fine with that. I'm fine with these guys just, struggling mightily, maybe even struggling just to make bogey on some of these holes. And so, I'm really looking forward to seeing this course, all week. And it's a tremendous, you think about there's no water on the course. It's just, Henry Founds, he originally wanted this to be a link style course, and you can kind of see that, as digging in as much as I have like you over the last couple of weeks and writing the preview and, just the slope, the slope reminds me of Augusta, just all the uneven lines, the greens are so challenging, obviously the hardest greens in the world. And then you get in, you throw the rough in there. I think the rabbit hole this week, just looking at, I know distance is going to matter, but I mean, you have to play in the fairway. There are some guys yesterday who were interviewed, Spieth was already at Oakmont, Justin Rose, Gary Woodland, and every single one is like, if you're not in the fairway, you have no chance. And so that's the starting point. And it's kind of a different course because this is not usually strokes gain approach, is so important. And of course it is, but this is not a course where you're going to aim at pins. Like you have to play the slopes. You have to just sometimes take the middle of the green. And there's not many places where you can actually miss on this course because it's so bad on both sides and so difficult. And then you add in the bunkers. And so there's just so many nuances. And I'm just really looking forward to looking at it and watching this one.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by the watch. I cannot wait to take in as much as possible. Sorry to anyone watching live. I'm fighting a pretty good cough today, so I'm trying to mute it. Hopefully you guys don't get it, but if you see me hacking on screen, I apologize. It's better than listening to it for sure. We do have some of the data in the rabbit hole. Let me bring some of this up for you here too. Obviously, limited strokes gained stuff here in the past because it's been such a long time, and that's only goes back so far. But if you look into our course stat sheet, you can get a sense of some of the things that Ron is touching on here. The one piece that keeps coming back when you listen to pros that are played it, or even, media folks that are lucky enough to go out there, that I think cameras don't do a great job of capturing. And it's very much the same when you're talking about Augusta National. The slope. and it's everywhere. It is just, you always hear that about Augusta. You never have a flat lie from the fairway. And I think you're going to have the same here. And it's so telling on the greens because these are big greens and they went and made them bigger during the renovation. But you can't have that mentality of like big greens, like it's going to be easy to hit these greens in red because you are dead in certain spots. Like we're talking about putting off the green type dead, 3-4 putts, insane type of things. And we have some of this data that you'll see here, even without the strokes gain data. But everything is going to play hard, even though you're not going to really find a tree inside the perimeter of the actual course, and there are no water hazards. But the bunkers are penal. These like Barranca type, things that they have patched out here, penal. And apparently they've tried to make them more, penal than they were in the past. So like it is death. So to Ron's point, like you need length because we're talking about a stretched out 7,400 yard par 70, but you also just are not going to be able to play from the rough here, right? There's just going to be opportunities where you're basically have to get back in the short grass, and play for par or really bogey at that point because, getting to the green is going to be tricky and holding the green is just not going to happen. So weather is a huge piece of this. And that's really what the two situations that kind of divide the last two times we were here, right? The 2016 year took on a lot of rain. Looks like we have some rain here in the forecast. They've got a lot of rain in the area over the last little bit. And that's why we had a couple of under par scores. Lowry actually started the third round, I believe, at like 7 under and fell back to the pack. So just, classic Shane in his own way. Sunday scaries for Shane. But, you go back to the 2007 version and, Tiger, I think, threw up like a 68 or something like that on Saturday, which is an insane score that year because you're dealing with, Angel Cabrera winning at 5 over, Tiger right there at 6 over. I think we're probably kind of in the middle of that. I think they really, really want it to be, par being a fantastic score. So, and you see a mix, right? DJ won. Angel Cabrera had some length, but Jim Furyk was second in both of those, right? Not a guy who's been known for, prodigious length throughout his career, keeps the ball in play. It's kind of a harder week to handicap in the sense that like you really aren't going to find the particular golfer archetype that's going to work here. It's going to be someone that just plays the best golf, has the whole bag for the week, and minimizes, the big numbers, right? Because they're inevitable. When you kind of go down here, again, you're going to see everything is difficult. You kind of get into some of the breakdown in terms of what we're looking at here. Accuracy, it's hard. Good drive percentage is hard, right? I think you're probably going to live, in my mind, I'm going to live kind of in the middle of these two numbers all week. So, an average, I think, is probably a good way to look at it. This is the stuff that was really, really telling to me. 3-putt avoidance on a standard PGA Tour event. You're 3-putting 2.8% of the time. Just, these guys are amazing, right? We're hacks. We go out there, we're 3-putting a handful of times around. Look at what happened here in the last couple times we were here. We're talking about 3x, 3.5x on 3 putts, right? You're talking about actual 4 putts happening here, depending on where you are on these greens. So they're going to be fast. There's sub air. So even if there's, rain here, they're going to be baked out. There's the rough is thick. We've talked about this a lot. I had a question in chat and I couldn't find it to answer back because they were wanting to know around, chipping and scrambling around the green in thick grass. There's a lot of that. There's also some massive front to back, false front, tight grass chipping that's going to happen, right? You're going to hit a fantastic shot within maybe 10 feet of the pin, and we're going to watch it slowly pull off the green. It's all over the place. So it's not a place run, and you can speak to any other dynamics that you want, but I think it's going to be just a thick, rough test around the green because there's so many of these false fronts, and there's spots too. And Bryson even says it, and I think on the first, which is such a dramatic hole, you can't tell where the green starts and the fairway stops. It just kind of, you kind of land on that hill, and it's kind of just a drastic downhill with a big old green, but there's depth behind it, and you just can't. There's very much can be in a spot where you're having to chip off of the short stuff too. Oh, sorry, you're muted.
It's a very interesting mix of this just rough that you can't even find your ball in, combined with the short grass areas that, like you said, are mowed so tightly that, I mean, you could compare them to Augusta, to some of these other courses that are really tough to chip from the short grass. And so, I think that's mostly in the front. I think the rough does surround pretty much every green. But yeah, that also gives these guys the ability to kind of play a link style game. Where that's what I wrote about in the preview. Some of these shorter hitters can use the ground game to kind of get up to the green. And so I think it's going to be really interesting from that perspective. But yeah, just getting back to the greens, like, they've been described as, tilted basketball courts. So just, I mean, we're talking extremely fast. This is the highest I've ever seen on a stit meter. They could be as high as 15 by Sunday, which is you just don't ever see that anywhere. And so, you combine that with the natural sloping, the undulations, and that's the speed is going to affect you, not just on the putting green though. Like you're going to be thinking about it on approach. You're going to be thinking on it, like you said, when you're chipping. We're going to see so many times when guys will chip and the balls, they'll just go across the green and they'll be chipping a second time. So I think the speed and the slope, combine those together, and it's just something that's always going to be on your mind. And so, yeah, I think you combine that with, I think 3-putt avoidance, that's going to be one of the biggest things for me all week. And not just, and we have that in the rabbit hole, not just 3-putt avoidance, but obviously with greens this big, we're looking at 3-putt avoidance from 25 plus feet as well. And so I think total driving, like you said, you kind of looking, I think a good idea is to look at, who are some of the best drivers with distance combined with accuracy. And I think total driving and the rabbit hole gives us that. So I think this is definitely one of the weeks I'm going to be looking at that for sure.
Yeah, we've heard it's really hard to capture in the data, and it's really hard from like a strategic standpoint, where there's going to be spots where the rough is going to be so thick and lush right off the first cut that you're almost better like spraying it, right? Where you can get, like, if you were to miss, you almost want the bad miss, which is weird, right? We don't want to actually capture that in the data because it's not like I want to look at guys that are bad in distance from the edge of the fairway, because I also want them to be in the fairway. But it's almost like a spot where, I saw that almost in Bryson's video when he was contemplating what club, and it was just always kind of came back to driver, because he's just like, let's just get it down there, right? Let's just always risk, like chasing it down there, because if you hang back and, when you kind of hook, a driving iron, and then now all of a sudden you're laid back and you're in the rough, well, now you're probably not offline too far. Now you're dead, because that stuff is going to be thick and gnarly. And that's the one part. It's going to play softer if it rains, but it's also that rough gets even more thick and nasty. So yeah, I mean, it's a massive, massive challenge. To be honest, I just don't think that there are a lot of guys that can win this tournament. I think we're even more so than a standard major. I think we're really, from like an actual winner standpoint, it's a really small pool, in my opinion, and like even smaller than maybe you think. I just don't think that there are many guys. There's a handful of guys that could be super competitive. I don't want to disparage Jim Furyk. He was an elite golfer when he played, but there's guys that kind of can plot around and get around with accuracy. Aaron Badley was very much in the mix here until he collapsed on Sunday. Just a small, I think, number of guys that can actually win.
And just really quick, we haven't really even talked about the bunkers yet. And, Joe Highsmith played here in the 2021 amateur. Yeah. And he played in the 2021 amateur. And what he said is there were some holes where, and I know most of these, the sand saves are capturing around the green, but he basically said the fairway bunkers are so penal that there were some holes where he just hit it onto a different hole. And he didn't even care if he was in the rough, because he just wanted to avoid the bunkers at all costs. So it's not just the rough, it's the bunkers. The lips are so high that, I read one guy who plays there, members, 80% of the time he's chipping out sideways. You can't go at the hole when you're in some of these bunkers. And so, it's interesting to note that, when the rough is this uniform, it's this thick, you may have some guys who, try some unique stuff this week.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be, shot making. It's what a U.S. Open should be. It's what major championship golf should be. It's going to test you for 4 days. The mental test is, I think, going to be one of the things that's the most taxing to these players, right? There's just, I heard Jeff Ogilvy talking about it. He was the defending champ. I believe he was on with the guys of the Fried Egg. Came here in 2007 as the defending champ from 2006. Played with Tiger in that round. I think Tiger and Phil. But he said, the only like hole that's kind of like an exhale hole is the 300-yard par 3, because there's really just no, like, you just don't have to really think about that one. You just kind of have to send it. Everything else is so mentally taxing. And that's kind of the important piece this week. That is a key piece of major championship golf anyway, is not being too hard on yourself when you have the inevitable 3 putts and bogeys. When you get a bad lie compared to maybe your playing partner who was over there the day before, like, things are going to happen. But the mental test of what we're going to have here for 4 days is going to be grueling, and it should be, right? The U.S. Open is such a unique event. You want to make sure that you feel like that champion earned that for 4 days, and I don't think there's any doubt that Oakmont is that test and is going to hold up to it. So let's see. Gene's got a question. Without the data in the rabbit hole for Oakmont, how would you guys go about estimating approach shot distribution percentage? It's really hard. It's a fair question. What are your thoughts, Ron? I mean, I have a couple thoughts.
Yeah, so I took a general look at some of the distances off the tee, and again, this is one where it's going to depend on player strategies, because if you remember from 2016, DJ just bombed it out there, and he had tons of wedges into these greens, like more than you would think. And so, I think guys obviously who are going to be a little more aggressive off the tee, it's really going to vary. I think it's going to be, just for the average golfer, I think it's going to be pretty uniform throughout. I think obviously with some of these longer par 4s, obviously the long par 3s, you're going to get your usual allotment of 200 plus. But in general, I'm not boiling it down to any specific distances that I'm going to weigh more than others. I think pretty uniform for me on approach. So not getting too into the weeds, especially since we kind of don't have good data on that. And I think players are going to play this course very differently off the tee.
1,000%. That's really, it's, I'm always a little bit reluctant to get tied too heavily into approach shot distribution anyway, because I think it can vary so much for player. You are definitely dialing it back into kind of a, an average for that, because the off the tee club selection is going to vary so much that it's, you can get really, I think, noisy data in there. More so maybe looking at comp courses, or, looking at courses that have, I think some of these, high rough penalty, high missed fairway penalties, difficult scoring conditions, some of the things that I think the rabbit hole can really help you with, versus the approach shot distribution, which can be a little bit noisy. And like, approach shots into fast greens, like scrambling into fast greens, all that stuff. Like, looking at, I think, those different things, because to Ron's point, yeah, it's great that you can chip and, you're around the green proximity, is nice. But how does that play when you're dealing with these just absolute mammoth 14 and a half, 15 stimp greens? That's a different test than a 11 and a half, 12 that we would see standard on the PGA Tour. So, that's more of a unique feature that I think you'd want to be looking at this week.
And that's the beauty of the rabbit hole, because not only do we have the fast greens and we have large greens, but again, basically what I did is I went and looked at the strokes gained per round for putting. And so when you select a very difficult filter, like, you are getting the most difficult putting surfaces over the last, 10 plus years. So this is really a great week where there's so many dynamics to this course that fit what you can do in the rabbit hole. And so if you, mini models, whether you're building a full model, you just want to look at the data, like, there's so many angles you can kind of look at here and kind of get a good idea of which players have done well in the past on obviously there's no course you can really compare this to, in my opinion. But again, when you're looking at tiers of difficult courses, you can kind of break it down into, and this is why Oakmont was actually one of the reasons why I didn't just go easy, average, difficult. Like, you have to have a very difficult section in the rabbit hole for scoring conditions, and obviously Oakmont is the top of the list for that.
Yeah, No, it's a good call. Colton's lucky to be in the area, heading into the course right now. What should I be looking at that might surprise with how these guys approach today? Do you think they'll be experimenting a lot with practice times? Mondays are a little different for these guys. Typically, it depends on the guy. To Ron's point, depends on how much they've been out there in the past. Off the tee club, I think would be something that I'd be trying to watch to see how certain guys are approaching, particular holes. Our guys practicing, because some guys like to play and do practice rounds from mint conditions. How much are guys playing from some weird spots? How much are they trying to, excuse me, I landed in the fairway, but I'm going to throw 4 balls over here. I'm also going to take a couple rips and see what happens if I just miss this fairway by 3-4 yards. Because sometimes guys don't want to get that stuff in their head. They have really nice clean practice rounds to go out there and pretend like things are going to go really nicely, but who's actually getting in there and getting the sense of how it's going to play. And then the putting stuff too. I mean, I think body language on the range is something I love to look at, see how confident guys are, how much they keep, are they there with their coach? Are they there with just themselves and their caddy? How much are they trying to figure it out on their own, and kind of where their head's at. So yeah, off the tee with club selection probably be the one thing, Colton, for me that I'd really want to see, particularly on a couple holes, like how guys are really approaching. 2 is a great example. 2 and 3 I think are really really important holes in terms of what guys are going to go do off the tee.
Yeah, a lot of guys have been there already leading up to this week, and so they have an idea. And Mondays are usually a day you're trying to get at least 9 holes in. Just talked to Bud Cauley's caddy, and he said they just walked the whole front. He just walked the whole front 9, and Bud was about to play. So, I don't know if guys Mondays usually experimenting is a good word, because especially the guys who've never played this course, their first time. Today's a really important day for those guys. But guys like Xander and Jordan Spieth, who were just here. Spieth was here yesterday. Xander was here last week. It's they probably have a little better idea of what their game plan is going to be.
Yeah, and you get into pro-ams and stuff on Wednesday. Some Mondays and Tuesdays can be really, really important. Let's look at the board. We'll start there, courtesy of our friends over at Gambling. Let me refresh this to see what we have here. Josh, what kind of sickos are playing a course like this on a random Tuesday? I mean, people sign up to be members here, Josh, and have so much pride, to post their big, massive scores, because it's unique. It's its own thing. And then you feel good about your handicap, adjusted on whatever. I don't even know what the rating, the slope is, but I imagine it's probably pretty severe. Then you go to a local muni with your boys, and you kick their teeth, and you feel like I cut my chops over at Oakmont all the time, and here we are. Scotty Scheffler plus 280 is your favorite. That is on FanDuel. That appears to be, for the most part, available across the market. A little shorter there on Caesars, which makes a lot of sense. Bryson DeChambeau, that has gotten shorter. 9 on DraftKings looks to be kind of the other one that's standing out. We'll see if that's accurate, but moving significantly elsewhere. John Rahm, slow start yesterday in Virginia, then kind of got it rolling a little bit. Basically baked out to 12 across the board. Again, Caesars there at 10. Rory is really fascinating. 12 for Rory, which is very, very interesting.
He might not win ever again.
Yeah. It's crazy, Ron, right? I mean, I know you're, half tongue in cheek there, but it is fascinating, right? We felt like it could have gone one or two ways post Masters, right? It feels very evident that it's gone one way, and he articulated that, which is very interesting because, missed the cut at the Canadian Open, and basically he just says straight up, I don't know. It's hard for me to go out and, find the motivation to go out and practice like I was before. And it's like, wow. And that's part of why I've always really enjoyed Rory, the transparency, the honesty. He will share, right? Obviously there was feedback from how he handled everything at Quail Hollow and not really talking to the media around the driver situation, all the PGA stuff. But for the most part, Rory, in terms of famous elite professional athletes, gives us what we want at the mic often. And we he gave us something he maybe shouldn't have given us. Look, he can go out and win anything. He's really hard to back right now. It's almost a unbettable spot. And I don't want to say that and he goes out and win, but knowing what we know right now, it feels Victor like when Victor went and, won in Florida after telling us he has no idea where the ball's going and doesn't trust it at all. And like Roy's just like, yeah, I'm not super motivated. I, kind of climb the top of the mountain and here we go. I still think that there's that fire in him that makes him great. That's going to turn on eventually. If it's still off this week, it's really hard. And that number has drifted quite a bit. So that's its own tier. But talk to me about Rory or anything else you want up there.
No, I mean, hey, it's I don't know what he was a couple weeks ago, but I know I'm pretty sure Bryson wasn't ahead of him. So yeah, it's just a really interesting view of him, like almost to the point where he looks a little disinterested. Obviously, this is a major, so I know he's gonna get back on that horse for this week, but. Yeah, it's just always seems like it's been a mental thing with him. But yeah, I mean, look at that Xander number though. I mean, that's I pulled out a stat. I really dug into his U.S. Open. I mean, I knew he was good in U.S. Opens, but when you actually look at his profile, like it's just staggering. He's gaining 2.84 strokes. I mean, we're talking the last 9 majors here in the U.S. Open. Like, so it's been a consistently good Xander, and we all know he hasn't been himself recently. He's still trying to piece it all together. But that's a really, really tempting number. And, even, it was 20-1 across the board pretty much, and it's already dropped a little bit. So it'd be interesting to see if that continues to slide. But it's going to be really hard for me not to take a little bite at that.
Someone who bet him at the Masters and then bet him at the PGA Championship. I am not interested this week, but solely because I just can't do it anymore. Right now, but I'm with you. He's a great fit. He just so far has been unable to put all 4 elements together at the same time, right? For 4 rounds. Does he have all 4? He has all 4 in spades. He won 2 majors last year. Even before he won 2 majors, this is a guy that was just like, this is a major champion. He's got the entire game. So understand why someone would be very much interested in chasing Xander, especially with his U.S. Open history, plus 20 for sure. Part of it for me, Ron, is that, on, I don't know if it was Saturday or Sunday in the middle of the PGA. I think it was Sunday morning. Scotty was turning it on at Quail Hollow. I grabbed the plus 480 on Scotty. So I'm kind of tied. I really don't know what to do with the week. I do have a little bit of Foxy money yesterday, 80-1, burning a hole in my ticket now. Or burning a hole in my pocket. So I might get some more tickets. I might play around with Bryson or Rahm. Maybe Bryson or Rahm without Scotty markets. So maybe I can cash all of it. I'm not sure what to do. But for me, it almost stops there. I think, it's not that Rory or Xander can't win. I think they totally can. Maybe even Xander more than Rory right now with where he's at. But if Rahm has composure and doesn't, start to beat himself up. Absolutely love his game and where it's trending. He's an absolutely elite putter, in terms of combination of distance, accuracy, putting. Rahm has all that. So I think it's a really, again, super duper small tier that can really win. Now, Colin Morikawa continues to play, for the most part, really good golf. Not been so great as of late. If you dig in a little bit, it's been kind of a little bit of a rough patch, but again, his ceiling is so high. Neiman wins again on Live, which people that blindly back Neiman are probably pretty happy about it. Ludwig bounced back a little bit after a slow start in Canada, 35. JT at 40. You see Tommy at 40. We can expand this a little bit. Again, Lowry. Then you get into this section where, for me, these are all really interesting placement bets. Or they're interesting, each way bets, if that's an option for you. If you, have interest in these guys. Sepp had, much larger numbers previously. Victor Hovland, I think, is, can very much ascend into that next tier. Then some real bigger numbers. How do you feel about a Corey Connors and Russell Henley? They can keep the ball in play. They're elite ball strikers. That's going to be a factor this week. Connors not giving up quite the distance that Russell is. but we've seen Henley, compete at last year's U.S. Open, competed the Masters, competed the Open Championship. The field is not too big for him. He won at Bay Hill, another track where you think thick rough, long, got to keep the ball in play. He's of interest to me. I don't know how Burns bounces back from that putting display in the playoff yesterday. You start to get down into triple digits, and these guys for me are not that they can't win. They're all tremendous golfers, but it's an each way or a finishing position bet for me, Ron. I don't know how big you think the pool is to win.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do think there's a couple interesting names down there, specifically Matsuyama and Tony Finau, who this course is going to play so tough, and their biggest weakness is putting. And so this course is going to be so difficult for everyone to putt. And so, I think in a way that levels the playing field for some of these guys who have proven to play really well on some of these really difficult courses. Not saying that a guy like Finau is going to, win or even top 5 this week, but I think a guy like that who has experience, who has the strength, who has the ability to bomb it off the tee, has more of a chance than the odds are giving him right now. And so, I don't think there's many guys I would take a long look at, but he's one along with Hideki that I would strongly consider.
Yeah, I don't hate that. I don't hate those names at all. I think Finau is really interesting. And the little
Pendrith is another guy who's proven he can play on the U.S. Open, tough tracks, who's got the kind of the same things Tony Finau does. And again, we've seen both those guys, and locally here in Detroit, I've seen both of them go at it. So I know both their games very well, and those are guys I do feel confident in.
Yeah, there's one other name. It was a little bit longer. It's gotten some steam, and I get why it's gotten some steam. You start to hear some last week content around it. It's Harris English, who just won at a long golf course with thick rough, with difficult scoring conditions. It's Torrey South. Backdoor top 2 at the PGA Championship. Has can get hot with the putter. So just going to keep himself in the mix. And he's playing some really good golf this year. Do I think Harris English is winning this tournament? I don't, but from again, each way bet or, just a straight up finishing position bet, you're going to get some pretty big numbers on him too. Really this tier of it's pretty interesting. Keegan, same boat for me. It can be pretty interesting. And Patrick Reed, right? Reed's another Torrey South winner. Won at Augusta, right? We were talking about the uneven lies and the elevation changes and the slopiness. And Patrick Reed can get really hot with the putter. So these guys too. I don't know. Siwoo's also interesting. I don't know that Siwoo has the composure or is going to have the course management skills to not be super aggressive. He has on paper the skill set, right? He tee to green, he could be exceptional. But for 4 rounds, that's going to be a tough test for Siwoo's, who likes to fire at pins and can run a little hot sometimes. But yeah, I like the Finau call out too. I think that's an interesting one too. Hard to not think about Rosie, who just continues to show up in major championships, which is really bizarre at this point in his career. 45, 46 years old, still very much getting it done. So yeah, when you get down into this section, it's interesting. One name that's interesting to me is you talked to the caddy this morning. That gentleman is of interest to me. He's playing really good golf. Bud Cauley Bud Cauley fell off the map for a little bit, had a car accident and coming back from major injuries. But this is a guy with elite pedigree coming up. And when you do some stuff, and I'll dig into it, and maybe Andy and I will get into a little bit more tomorrow on the betting show here, Betsperts Golf on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll dig into a little bit more rabbit hole data. I'll do some more stuff here on Twitter this week too, sharing some stuff. Start looking at lag putting, approach putting, 3-putt avoidance on really fast greens. You're going to see Harris English. You're going to see Bud Cauley towards the top. And to your point, I'm with you. I think that is one of the main key stats of the week is really, who's shown an ability to navigate these really fast greens, and avoid 3-putts. And, Bud Cauley's one of those guys. He's, 200 something, I believe. So again, a name that you're, You're digging way down here for Bud Colley, but he's better than this, in my opinion, and we've seen it a little bit this year. Someone's got a big number on Bud Colley. Okay, ESPN has a huge number. I was to say he's 200 in most spots. But yeah, from an each way standpoint, there's, I think, worse bets on the board.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah, I'm going to dig in a little bit more. So anything else or anyone else or anything else before we wrap that you want to touch on here? Your preview's up on the site. People need to check that out. It's obviously, as always, the most extensive course preview that you're going to find anywhere out there. Often imitated, never duplicated. Ron's a one-on-one.
Yeah, I know we didn't have much time to dig into much rabbit hole stuff, and you'll get into that tomorrow. But yeah, I'm going to be putting a lot of stuff out there. Again, just the ability to get so creative with some of the filters we have. Whether it's majors, we have major filter. If you want to look at, obviously long courses, par 70s. I think only having 2 par 5s this week is something that really, obviously, it's going to make it even play more difficult. Probably one of the main reasons Oakmont is so difficult is you don't have any par 5s really to get breathers on. Even the 2 they have are just so difficult. So, whether you want to play around with, high number of bunkers, obviously we have the most bunkers here out of any course. And so, yeah, there's all your green stuff. These are POA greens. Now, they are like true POA, but they're still not West Coast POA because they shave them so tight. And so, obviously the West Coast POA is not as fast as this, and it's much more bumpy, especially when you get into the afternoon. This is cut so low and so tight, and that's why they're so fast that you really can't compare it to almost any grass type. And so it's hard. For me, for green surface this week, I may just focus more, leave that blank, and just focus on, obviously the green speed is fast, and the strokes gained. We have strokes gained putting, and so I'm going to be looking at very difficult and obviously fast speeds. And yeah, so, again, missed fairway penalty, rough penalty, those are both going to be very high this week. And so just playing around with, off the tee stuff and seeing, which guys have kind of tended to play the best, and just a wide assortment of stats off the tee you can look at as well. So it's a great rabbit hole week overall.
Yeah, I agree. And mess around with sample. I was traveling last weekend, and so I haven't built my model yet, but I'm going to mess around with sample. I typically always advise that you don't have too many things selected at once because you start to overfit and then get yourself a real small sample. But I want to look at scrambling from the rough and scrambling from the short grass, but I want to do it with fast greens also, right? And I want to see what kind of sample I have with that. It might not be enough. I might have to go back too far, and it might be, not really relevant data. But I want to see those things. I want to look at approach, with high missed fairway penalty, high rough penalty, where it's difficult to gain, and maybe they're really fast greens, right? I want to look at these different things this week and kind of see, how much I could start to pull out some of these Bud Colleys and Tony Finau's, for example, and see where they get. I know that I'm going to build a model that has Scotty Scheffler on the top. I'm not trying to do that. It's going to happen naturally. It's just how can I identify some of these other guys for down the board bets, DFS player pools, all those different things. So I'm going to mess around with that too, for sure. And again, if you are a subscriber, you can go into this here, view expert rankings. We already have some. You can see PGA Tout, John Hasselbauer, tour picks from, Joe I, their podcast, the Preferred Lions podcast. You got Andy Lack's first one up here from Inside Sports Network. Ron and I, Andy Mahler, will have some other ones up here shortly. So you can go in and kind of get a sense of what other people are doing. I think it's going to be an important piece this week too. Make sure, you can kind of take a look at those and see, is there something that you didn't look at, or maybe, something that you need to consider statistically. So awesome stuff. Again, head over to the site. You can find a fantastic way to sign up for super cheap through our friends over at BetMGM. We also have a great deal with our friends over at Drafters as well. If you want to check it out and you haven't, taken in the free content, we super appreciate that too. Make sure you just subscribe wherever you consume it. But check it out, reach out specifically. Maybe those are options you can take advantage of. DM us directly. PGA Splits 101 on Twitter, at Ryan Noonan, or Betsperts Golf specifically. DM our Twitter account. I check our Betsperts Golf DMs at least once a day. So we will get back to you with a specific promo code if you need it. So, all right, smash the like before you take off. Again, we'll be back with more stuff. Cannot wait for this one. It's going to be a fantastic, fantastic event. Thanks for hanging out with us today.